It was just after 7 a.m. when Sarah Jones pulled into the parking lot of Second Chance Animal Shelter. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete as she sipped her coffee, preparing for what she thought would be a normal Tuesday. Sarah had worked at the shelter for 5 years, and the morning routine was always the same: unlock the doors, check on the animals, and prepare their breakfast before the other volunteers arrived. As she approached the entrance, Sarah noticed something unusual. 3 large black garbage bags sat in front of the glass doors. At first, she thought someone had dropped off donations after hours. People often left blankets, towels, and pet food. But something about these bags felt different. They weren't the typical shopping bags filled with supplies. These were heavy-duty contractor bags, tightly sealed with duct tape. "That's odd," Sarah muttered to herself, setting down her coffee on the bench nearby. She poked one of the bags with her foot. It seemed heavy, too heavy for just blankets or clothes. Then she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. One of the bags moved slightly. Sarah quickly unlocked the front door and rushed inside to grab her phone. Her hands trembled as she called her manager, Tom. "Tom, it's Sarah. Someone left 3 garbage bags at the front door, and I swear one of them just moved. I think there might be animals inside." "Don't open them yet," Tom replied, his voice tense. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Call Dr. Miller, too." The next few minutes felt like hours as Sarah paced by the window, watching the bags. Twice more she saw subtle movements. She couldn't just stand there waiting. What if an animal inside couldn't breathe? Making a quick decision, she grabbed a pair of scissors from the front desk and headed back outside. Kneeling beside the first bag, Sarah carefully cut a small opening at the top. A horrible smell immediately hit her nose: urine, feces, and something worse. As she widened the hole, she heard a faint whimpering sound. "Oh my God," she whispered. Just then, a car door slammed in the parking lot. Tom was running toward her, with Jessica, another volunteer who lived nearby. "I couldn't wait," Sarah explained, pointing to the bag. "Something's alive in there." Tom knelt down and carefully opened the bag wider. Inside, they could see fur, dirty, matted, and wet. As Tom pulled back more of the plastic, 3 pairs of eyes looked up at them. Puppies. Tiny, trembling puppies huddled together in their own waste. "Jessica, get some towels and water," Tom ordered, his face grim. "Sarah, help me get them inside." As they carried the first bag into the shelter's intake room, Dr. Miller's car pulled up outside. Together, they brought in all 3 bags and placed them on the examination tables. When they finally opened all 3 bags completely, everyone in the room froze in horror. 12 puppies in total, none older than a few weeks. Their ribs showed through patchy fur. Many had open sores and were covered in fleas. 2 weren't moving at all. "Who would do this?" Jessica whispered, tears streaming down her face as she gently cleaned a small brown puppy with a damp towel. Dr. Miller was already checking the puppies one by one, her experienced hands moving quickly. "These puppies have been neglected for some time. They're severely dehydrated and malnourished." As they worked to save the tiny lives, Sarah noticed something else at the bottom of one bag: a torn piece of paper with an address scribbled on it. She handed it to Tom, who immediately pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police," he said, his voice hard with anger. "This isn't just abandonment. This is cruelty, and someone needs to be held responsible." Outside, the shelter security camera continued recording as a day that began with horror slowly transformed into a desperate fight to save 12 innocent lives. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. The small examination room at Second Chance Animal Shelter had become an emergency triage center. Dr. Miller worked quickly, her glasses sliding down her nose as she checked each puppy. "This one's barely breathing," she said, holding up a tiny black and white puppy no bigger than her hand. "Sarah, get the oxygen setup ready." Sarah rushed to the cabinet where they kept emergency supplies. Her hands shook as she prepared the small oxygen mask designed for newborn puppies. Behind her, Tom and Jessica were bathing the stronger puppies in shallow tubs of warm water, carefully removing layers of dirt and waste. "I count 10 that are responding well," Tom said, gently drying a small tam puppy with a soft towel. "The other 2—" He couldn't finish his sentence. Dr. Miller didn't look up from her work. "We focus on the ones we can save right now. Sarah, call Riverside Emergency Vet and see if they can take the 2 critical ones." They have better equipment than we do. As Sarah made the call, the front door chimed. Officer Mike Peterson walked in, notebook in hand. His face grew serious when he saw the condition of the puppies. I got your call, he said to Tom. Looks even worse than you described. Tom handed him the piece of paper they'd found in the bag. This address was with them. It's over on Pine Ridge Road, I think. Officer Peterson nodded. I know the area. Old farmhouses. I'll head over there after I take your statement. He looked at the puppies again, his expression hardening. Whoever did this will face charges. While Tom spoke with the officer, Dr. Miller called Sarah over. Look at this, she said, pointing to the inside of a small puppy's ear. This is a tattoo, a breeder's mark. Sarah squinted at the tiny green numbers. A puppy mill? Almost certainly, Dr. Miller replied. And based on their condition, I'd say it's one of the bad ones. These puppies have never seen proper care. They're probably full of parasites, too. Jessica approached with a puppy wrapped in a towel. This little guy just drank some water. First one to keep it down. It was a small victory, but everyone in the room smiled. Then the puppy Jessica was holding began to shake violently. He's seizing. Dr. Miller took the puppy quickly. Get me the diazepam. Sarah fumbled with the medicine cabinet, finding the correct vial and syringe. Dr. Miller injected the tiny puppy while everyone watched, holding their breath. Slowly, the seizure stopped. The puppy lay still, but breathing. Likely hypoglycemia, Dr. Miller explained. Their blood sugar is dangerously low from starvation. Outside, they heard sirens as the emergency transport arrived from Riverside Vet. 2 veterinary technicians rushed in with a special carrier designed to transport critical animals. We'll take the 2 worst cases, one of them said. Dr. Wilson is waiting at our facility. As they carefully transferred the weakest puppies, Officer Peterson finished taking photos for evidence. I've seen animal neglect cases before, but this, he shook his head. I'll call you once I check out that address. Just as the emergency team left, Jessica called out from the bathing station. Guys, there's something else in this bag. Everyone gathered around as Jessica reached deep into the 3rd bag, pulling out a small metal box. She opened it carefully. Inside were papers, breeding certificates, sale records, and a handwritten note. Sarah read it aloud. I can't do this anymore. They're sick, and I don't have money for medicine. The inspectors are coming tomorrow. I'm sorry. The note wasn't signed, but the breeding certificates had a name. Happy Tails Kennel. Tom's face flushed with anger. Happy Tails? There's nothing happy about this. Officer Peterson took the box. This is exactly what we need. Documentation, proof of ownership. As the officer left with the evidence, the shelter team turned back to the remaining puppies. 8 were now drinking water. 1 was eating small bits of softened food. We got a long night ahead, Dr. Miller said, checking her watch. But I think most of them will make it. Outside, dark clouds gathered as a spring storm approached. But inside the shelter, the first battle had been won. The real fight, for justice, was just beginning. By noon, news of the abandoned puppies had spread throughout the small town of Riverside. Local residents began arriving at Second Chance Animal Shelter with donations. Puppy food, blankets, cleaning supplies, and cash. A line formed outside as people waited to help or just to offer support. Sarah stood at the front desk, overwhelmed by the community's response. An elderly woman handed her a check for $500. My late husband loved dogs, the woman said, her eyes misting. Use this for their medical care. Before Sarah could properly thank her, the shelter phone rang again. It was Riverside Emergency Vet. One of the critical puppies is stable now, the veterinary technician reported. The little black and white one is responding to treatment. But I'm sorry to tell you that the smallest one didn't make it. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. Thank you for trying, she said quietly. Hanging up the phone, she made her way back to the examination room where Dr. Miller was still working. Tom had set up temporary pens with heating pads for the recovering puppies. Jessica sat on the floor, bottle feeding the weakest ones who couldn't yet eat on their own. We lost the smallest one, Sarah announced. The room fell silent for a moment. Then Dr. Miller spoke. 9 survivors out of 12. Considering their condition, that's actually remarkable. Tom nodded, but his expression remained grim. Any word from Officer Peterson? As if on cue, the front door opened and Officer Peterson walked in. His uniform was muddy, and he looked disturbed by whatever he had seen. "You were right about Happy Tail's kennel," he said, pulling out his notebook. "It's a puppy mill operation run by a man named Frank Dawson. The place is a nightmare. We found 23 more dogs in terrible conditions. Animal control is there now, removing them all." 23 more? Jessica gasped. "Where will they all go?" Officer Peterson ran a hand through his thinning hair. "That's the thing. County shelter is already at capacity. They're calling other shelters in neighboring counties, but most are full too." Tom and Sarah exchanged glances. Their small shelter was barely equipped to handle the 12 puppies they already had. "What about Dawson?" Tom asked. "Did you arrest him?" "That's the strange part," Peterson replied. "He wasn't there. The place looked like someone left in a hurry. Dirty dishes in the sink, TV still on. We put out an APB for him. His truck was spotted heading toward the state line this morning." Dr. Miller looked up from examining a puppy. He knows he's in serious trouble. Animal cruelty, neglect, operating an illegal breeding facility. He could face jail time. Sarah felt her phone vibrate. Looking down, she saw a news alert from the local station. BREAKING. Police raid illegal puppy mill, owner on the run. "It's hit the news already," she said, showing the others. Almost immediately, the shelter phone began ringing again. This time it was a reporter asking for details. Then another call came from a neighboring shelter offering to take some of the dogs. A third call came from a local pet store donating supplies. In the midst of this chaos, the front door opened again. A tall man in a suit walked in, carrying a briefcase. "I'm looking for whoever's in charge," he announced. "I'm Daniel Weber from the State Department of Agriculture, Animal Welfare Division." Tom stepped forward. "I'm the manager. What can we do for you?" "Actually," Weber said, "I'm here to help you. We've been investigating Happy Tail's kennel for months after receiving anonymous complaints. Those puppies you found are evidence in what could be the largest animal cruelty case in this county's history." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder filled with documents. "These are inspection reports, complaints, and photographs we've collected. Frank Dawson has been running illegal breeding operations in 3 different counties, always moving when authorities get close." Sarah looked through the glass door leading to the examination room, where the surviving puppies were now resting. "So this isn't just about saving these puppies," she said slowly. "They're going to help stop this from happening to other dogs." Weber nodded. "Exactly. And we'll need your help to build the case when we catch him." Outside, more people arrived with donations as dark clouds gathered overhead. A storm was coming, but inside the shelter, a different kind of storm was brewing. One that would bring justice for the puppies in the bags and hopefully prevent future suffering. The next morning arrived with heavy rain pounding against the shelter windows. Sarah had spent the night on a cot beside the puppy pens, waking every 2 hours to check on them. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but she managed a tired smile when Tom arrived with fresh coffee. "How are they doing?" he asked, handing her a steaming cup. "Better than expected," Sarah replied, taking a grateful sip. "They all made it through the night. The little tan one with the crooked ear is starting to play a bit." Tom knelt down to look at the puppies. Most were sleeping, tiny bodies rising and falling with each breath. The tan puppy Sarah mentioned raised its head curiously. "We should give them names," Tom suggested. "We can't keep calling them by their colors." Sarah nodded. "The tan one reminds me of a survivor. Let's call him Lucky." Before they could discuss more names, the front door chimed. Through the glass, they saw a crowd of people standing in the rain, some holding umbrellas, others simply getting wet. Jessica was trying to organize them into a line. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, joining Jessica at the front desk. "It's amazing," Jessica replied, her face bright with excitement despite the early hour. "The local news ran the story last night about the puppies. These people are here to help. Some want to donate money, others want to volunteer their time, and a few are asking about adoption." A middle-aged woman stepped forward. "I'm Helen Parker. I'm a retired veterinary technician. I heard you might need help with the puppies." Behind her, a young man raised his hand. "I work at the pet store downtown. My manager sent me with 5 bags of premium puppy food and a box of supplies." The phone rang, and Jessica grabbed it. After a brief conversation, she turned to Tom with wide eyes. That was the manager at Countryside Groceries. They want to host a fundraiser for the puppies this weekend. By mid-morning, the shelter had transformed. Volunteers sorted donations in the lobby. Helen Parker worked alongside Dr. Miller, checking each puppy's condition. A local carpenter had arrived and was building additional pens to house the puppies more comfortably. In the middle of this activity, Officer Peterson returned, looking tired but satisfied. "We got him," he announced. Frank Dawson was arrested at a motel just across the state line. He's been brought back to face charges. "What about the other dogs from his property?" Sarah asked. "That's actually why I'm here," Peterson said. "The other shelters are at capacity. The county is asking if you can take 5 more of the dogs. They're adults, breeding females that are in better shape than the puppies." Tom looked around at the busy shelter, considering, where would we put them? A tall man in work clothes stepped forward. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm Jim from River Road Construction. My crew and I could build you a temporary structure out back, like a big shed with heating. We got the materials left over from a job we just finished." Tom looked stunned. "You do that? For free?" Jim shrugged. "My wife and I adopted our dog from this shelter 3 years ago. Best decision we ever made. Consider it payback." By afternoon, the rain had stopped, and Jim's construction crew was already setting up in the backlot. Inside, Sarah and Jessica worked with volunteers to name each puppy. Lucky was joined by Hope, Faith, Chance, Miracle, Spirit, Journey, Grace, and Destiny, names that reflected their survival against the odds. Dr. Miller checked the last puppy and updated her chart. Their progress is remarkable. They're still not out of danger, but their will to live is strong. As the day continued, local TV crews arrived to film the community effort. The reporter who had called yesterday interviewed Tom in front of the shelter. "What we're seeing here is more than just a rescue operation," Tom told the camera. "It's a community coming together to right a wrong. These puppies were treated as disposable, but today they're showing everyone that every life matters." Behind the cameras, Sarah watched the volunteers working. A horrible act had brought them here. Something beautiful was emerging from the darkness. The mystery of the black bags had revealed not just the worst of humanity, but also the best. 3 days after the puppies arrived at Second Chance Animal Shelter, the temporary structure behind the building was completed. Jim and his construction crew had worked tirelessly, creating a comfortable space for the 5 adult dogs rescued from Happy Tails Kennel. The new arrivals were scheduled to be transferred from the county shelter that afternoon. Sarah was preparing their kennels when Officer Peterson arrived with a woman she didn't recognize. She wore a business suit and carried a leather portfolio. "Sarah, this is District Attorney Monica Reynolds," Officer Peterson said. "She's handling the case against Frank Dawson." "It's nice to meet you," Sarah said, wiping her hands on her jeans before shaking the woman's hand. "Though I wish it were under better circumstances." "I understand," Monica replied. "I need to see the puppies and any evidence you collected. We're building our case, and it's stronger than I initially thought." Sarah led them to the puppy area where Helen Parker and 2 volunteers were handling the morning feeding. The puppies had improved dramatically. Their coats were beginning to shine, and most could eat soft food on their own now. "They look so much better," Officer Peterson remarked, bending down to pet Lucky, who playfully nipped at his fingers. "It's amazing what proper care can do," Sarah said. "But they still have a long way to go. Dr. Miller says they're all underweight, and at least 2 will need surgery for problems caused by their earlier neglect." Monica took photos with her phone and made notes in her portfolio. "I need to ask you something important," she said, her voice becoming serious. "In the evidence collected, we found breeding records for over 40 puppies sold in the last 6 months. But we only recovered 35 dogs total, including the ones left here." Sarah frowned. "So there are dogs missing?" "That's what we thought," Monica said. "Until this morning." She pulled a tablet from her portfolio and played a video. It showed Frank Dawson in an interview room, looking tired and unshaven. "I sold some of them," he said in the video, "to a man who said he ran a research lab. He paid cash, no questions asked. I needed the money after the last inspection fine." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "Research lab? You mean animal testing?" Monica nodded grimly. We believe so. Dawson gave us a name. Robert Graves. He claims this Graves approached him 6 months ago, offering to buy any puppies with defects that couldn't be sold as pets. That's horrible, Sarah whispered. It gets worse, Officer Peterson added. Based on Dawson's description, we think Graves is connected to an illegal testing operation the FBI has been trying to locate. They've been moving from state to state, staying one step ahead of authorities. Monica put the tablet away. The good news is, Dawson kept records of every transaction. He wrote down license plate numbers, meeting locations, dates. He was paranoid about being cheated. So his record keeping might help you find this testing lab? Sarah asked. Exactly, Monica replied. The FBI is already following the leads. But I wanted to let you know because if we find those dogs, we'll make room, Tom said firmly, having joined the conversation. Whatever it takes. Later that afternoon, as the 5 adult dogs arrived from County Animal Control, Sarah helped settle them into their new space. They were terrified, cowering at the back of their kennels. Unlike the puppies, who were too young to remember much, these dogs bore the emotional scars of years of mistreatment. It's okay, Sarah said softly to a trembling beagle mix. You're safe now. Dr. Miller joined her, examining each dog carefully. The physical wounds will heal faster than the emotional ones, she observed. These mothers have probably had litter after litter taken from them. As they worked, Tom entered with a stack of papers. The adoption applications are starting to come in for the puppies. Over 30 families want to give them homes. Sarah smiled, watching Lucky play with a small toy. That's wonderful, but I think we should wait a few more weeks. Let them get stronger. Tom nodded in agreement. And the mothers? Sarah looked at the scared dogs in their kennels. They deserve loving homes too. It might take longer, but we'll find the right families. Outside, the sun was setting on another busy day. The community support continued to pour in. What had started with horror, 3 black bags left at a shelter door, was slowly transforming into something hopeful. But somewhere out there, more dogs waited for rescue, and Sarah couldn't forget that part of the story remained unfinished. 1 week after the puppies arrived at Second Chance, Sarah arrived early to find Dr. Miller's car already in the parking lot. This was unusual. The veterinarian typically came in the afternoons unless there was an emergency. Sarah hurried inside, worried that one of the puppies might have taken a turn for the worse. Instead, she found Dr. Miller sitting in the office with a stranger, a tall man with gray hair and a serious expression. Sarah, this is Agent Marcus Wilson with the FBI, Dr. Miller said, standing to make introductions. He has some news about the investigation. Sarah shook the man's hand, noticing his firm grip and the badge clipped to his belt. Did you find the testing facility? She asked immediately. Agent Wilson nodded. Early this morning. An abandoned warehouse about 60 miles from here. We have been monitoring several locations based on Dawson's information. When we saw activity at 4 a.m., we moved in. And the dogs? Sarah asked, her heart pounding. Were there dogs there? Yes, Agent Wilson replied, his expression softening slightly. We found 17 dogs total, mostly young adults, some puppies. All appeared to be from puppy mills like Dawson's operation. Dr. Miller placed a hand on Sarah's arm. That's why I called you in early. They need places for these dogs, and fast. I told Agent Wilson that we might be able to help with some of them. Sarah's mind raced. The shelter was already at capacity with the 9 puppies and 5 mother dogs. Where would they put more animals? Before she could respond, the office door opened and Tom walked in, followed by Jessica. I called them too, Dr. Miller explained. I thought we should decide together. Agent Wilson turned to address the group. I understand your shelter is small and already stretched thin, but these dogs need immediate placement. They've been living in small cages, receiving minimal care. Many show signs of having been used in testing various products. What kind of testing? Jessica asked quietly. Agent Wilson hesitated. Primarily cosmetics and household cleaners, from what our team can tell. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but certainly harmful and cruel. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. Then Tom spoke up. How many do you need us to take, and when? As many as possible, Agent Wilson replied, today. Jessica gasped. Today? But where would we put them? We don't have enough kennels. Sarah had been thinking the same thing, but suddenly an idea came to her. What about the community center? They have that big multi-purpose room. Maybe they would let us use it temporarily. Tom nodded slowly. It's worth asking. And I bet some of our volunteers would be willing to foster a dog or two. Within hours, Sarah's idea had become reality. The mayor himself had approved the use of the community center after hearing about the situation. Local businesses donated supplies, pet food, bedding, temporary fencing to create separate areas. Volunteers arrived in waves, eager to help set up the makeshift shelter. By noon, everything was ready. At 1 p.m., a large van pulled into the community center parking lot. Agent Wilson stepped out first, followed by 2 other agents and a veterinarian from the FBI's Animal Response Team. 17 dogs, Agent Wilson confirmed. All have been given preliminary medical checks, but they'll need ongoing care. One by one, the dogs were brought into the community center. Unlike the puppies from the bags, most of these dogs could walk, though many moved cautiously, afraid of their new surroundings. Their conditions varied. Some had patches of missing fur, others had irritated skin or reddened eyes. All looked undernourished and frightened. A small white dog caught Sarah's attention. Unlike the others, it approached her, tail wagging hesitantly. Despite whatever it had been through, this little dog still trusted humans. Sarah knelt down, allowing the dog to sniff her hand. "You're safe now," she whispered. Dr. Miller joined her, checking the dog's tag. "This one's called Subject 12, she said with disgust. "We should give her a real name." Sarah thought for a moment, watching the little dog's brave approach despite its obvious fear. How about Phoenix? Rising from the ashes. Around them, the community center hummed with activity as volunteers helped settle each dog. News crews gathered outside, and phones rang constantly with people offering to help. This rescue was bigger than anything Second Chance had ever handled. Yet as Sarah watched Phoenix accept a gentle pat on the head, she knew they had made the right decision. The mystery of the black bags had grown into something much larger. A chance to make a real difference. 2 months had passed since the discovery of the puppies in black bags at Second Chance Animal Shelter. The morning was bright and clear as Sarah adjusted her blazer in the courthouse bathroom mirror. She rarely dressed so formally, usually wearing jeans and t-shirts for her work at the shelter, but today was different. Today she would testify against Frank Dawson and Robert Graves in the biggest animal cruelty case the county had ever seen. "You look nervous," Jessica said, fixing her own hair beside Sarah. "Don't be. Just tell the truth about what we found." Sarah nodded. "I know. It's just, I've never testified in court before." Outside the bathroom, the courthouse hallway buzzed with activity. News reporters waited with cameras, hoping to catch statements from witnesses. Animal rights activists held signs demanding justice. The case had attracted national attention after the FBI raid on the testing facility. Tom and Dr. Miller waited on a bench, reviewing their notes. Agent Wilson stood nearby, speaking quietly into his phone. "Everyone ready?" District Attorney Monica Reynolds approached the group, looking confident in her tailored suit. "The defense will try to make it seem like the conditions weren't that bad. They'll say the dogs were fed and housed. Your job is to tell the jury exactly what you saw, exactly what condition those animals were in." Sarah thought about Lucky, the tan puppy with the crooked ear. He had been adopted last week by a loving family with 2 children. From near death in a garbage bag to a home with a big yard and people who adored him. The transformation still amazed her. At 9:30 a.m., they entered the courtroom. It was smaller than Sarah had imagined from watching TV shows, but completely full. As she walked to her seat, she spotted Frank Dawson at the defense table. He looked thinner than in his photos, his eyes downcast. Beside him sat Robert Graves, the man who had purchased dogs for testing. Unlike Dawson, Graves stared straight ahead, showing no emotion. The judge entered and court proceedings began. The prosecutor outlined the charges: over 100 counts of animal cruelty, illegal breeding operation, tax evasion, and in Graves' case, conducting illegal animal testing. One by one, witnesses were called. Officer Peterson described finding the puppy mill. FBI agents detailed the raid on the testing facility. Veterinarians explained the medical conditions of the rescued animals. showing photos that made several jury members look away. When Sarah's turn came, she walked to the witness stand, feeling her heart pound. After being sworn in, she faced the courtroom. "Ms. Jones," Monica began, "please tell the court what you found on the morning of April 10th. Sarah took a deep breath. "I arrived at the shelter around 7 a.m. There were 3 black garbage bags by the front door. When I approached them, I noticed one bag moving slightly." "What did you find inside these bags?" 12 puppies total. They were lying in their own waste, severely malnourished. Many had open sores. They were so dehydrated their skin stayed tented when pinched. 3 were barely responsive. "And what happened to these puppies?" Sarah's voice grew stronger. "1 died at the emergency vet clinic. 2 others had to have surgeries for internal problems caused by malnutrition. The 9 survivors are now healthy and have been adopted." Monica showed photos of the puppies on the day they were found, then recent photos of the survivors in their new homes. The contrast was stark. "And the adult dogs that were later brought to your shelter?" "The 5 mother dogs are still with us. They had more emotional trauma, more fear of humans. 3 have been adopted by experienced owners. 2 are still waiting for the right homes, but they've improved greatly." When the defense attorney cross-examined Sarah, he tried to suggest that perhaps the bags had only been at the shelter for a short time, that maybe the puppies weren't as sick as she claimed. Sarah didn't waver. "I've worked with animals for 5 years. I know what severe neglect looks like. These puppies were dying. If they had been left much longer, none would have survived." By late afternoon, all testimony had been presented. As they left the courthouse, a reporter approached Sarah. "How do you feel about today's proceedings?" Sarah looked back at the courthouse. "I did my part. Now it's up to the jury to decide if these men will be held accountable. But regardless of the verdict, those dogs are safe now. They've found new lives. That's what matters most to me." Behind her, the sun began to set on the courthouse steps. Tomorrow the jury would deliberate. Justice was one step closer. 6 months had passed since the black bags appeared at Second Chance Animal Shelter. The morning air was crisp with early autumn as Sarah unlocked the front door. The shelter looked different now. Freshly painted walls, new flooring, and twice as many kennels as before. The community's generous donations after the high-profile case had allowed for major renovations. Sarah hung her jacket on the hook behind the desk and checked the schedule. Today was special. The final 2 dogs from the case were going to their forever homes. "Morning." Tom called, carrying a box of new dog toys through the lobby. "Big day, huh?" Sarah nodded, smiling. "I can hardly believe it. Phoenix and Daisy are finally getting adopted." Phoenix, the small white dog from the testing facility, had needed months of rehabilitation. Her fur had grown back thick and shiny, and her once fearful eyes now sparkled with playfulness. Daisy was one of the mother dogs from Dawson's puppy mill, the last to overcome her fear of people. Jessica arrived carrying a tray of cupcakes. "I thought we should celebrate," she explained. "Not just the adoptions, but the 1-month anniversary of the verdict." The trial had ended with both men receiving the maximum sentences possible. Frank Dawson got 8 years for animal cruelty and operating an illegal breeding facility. Robert Greaves received 12 years for animal cruelty, illegal testing, and additional charges related to disposing of hazardous materials. The case had set a precedent in the state for taking animal cruelty seriously. "Did you see the newspaper this morning?" Dr. Miller asked, entering with her medical bag. She wanted to give Phoenix and Daisy final checkups before they left. "They're running a feature about the new animal protection laws." Sarah had seen it. After the trial, the state legislature had passed what people were calling the black bag laws. Stronger regulations for breeding operations and harsher penalties for animal cruelty. Second Chance Shelter was mentioned prominently in the article. At 10 o'clock, the first adoption family arrived. The Wilsons had been visiting Phoenix weekly for 2 months, slowly building trust with the formerly traumatized dog. Their 12-year-old daughter had even written a school report about animal testing, inspired by Phoenix's story. "She slept with her clothes laid out last night," Mrs. Wilson told Sarah as they completed the final paperwork. "She was too excited to sleep, knowing today was the day." Sarah watched as the girl knelt beside Phoenix's kennel, talking softly to the small dog who wagged her tail enthusiastically. "Phoenix recognizes her voice," Sarah observed. She's found the perfect home with you. An hour later, Daisy's new family arrived, an older couple whose previous dog had passed away last year. They had specifically asked to adopt one of the harder-to-place dogs after following the case on the news. We have all the time in the world to help her adjust, Mr. Johnson explained, gently petting Daisy through the kennel bars. No rushing, no pressure. By noon, both dogs had left for their new lives. The shelter staff gathered in the break room, sharing Jessica's cupcakes and feeling the mix of joy and sadness that came with every successful adoption. I have something to show you all, Tom said, pulling out his phone. He opened an email with several attached photos. Remember Lucky? His family sent these yesterday. The photos showed the tan puppy, now much bigger, playing in a yard with children, sleeping on a couch, and wearing a bandana that said "Best Dog Ever." And here's one from Faith's family, Jessica added, showing her own phone. Another of the bag puppies appeared on screen, healthy and happy in her new home. One by one, they shared updates from the various families who had adopted the rescued animals. Every dog had a success story, everyone finding healing and love after their terrible start. As Sarah walked through the shelter later that afternoon, she paused at the empty kennels where Phoenix and Daisy had lived for months. Soon, new animals would fill these spaces, new challenges would come. But for now, she savored the victory. Outside, a car pulled into the parking lot. New visitors, perhaps looking to adopt. Sarah went to greet them, ready to help write another happy ending. Behind the reception desk hung a framed photo, the shelter team standing with all 9 surviving puppies from the black bags. Below it, a simple plaque read, "Every life matters. Second chances begin here." The mystery of the black bags had ended, but the ripples of change it created continued to spread, touching lives both human and animal in ways no one could have imagined that terrible morning 6 months ago.